Now, when we kick things off at 3:30 Eastern over on the CBS Sports Network, we're going to see two teams in the American Conference looking to build momentum for the rest of the season. And that is when the UAB Blazers make the field trip up to Annapolis, Maryland, in order to take on the Navy Midshipmen. Both teams coming off of wins against FCS opponents, with UAB winning a somewhat surprising shootout against Alabama State 52-42, while the Naval Academy, they were able to absolutely decimate their little brothers in VMI, another fellow military academy, in their very first game of the season. Now, the interesting thing about UAB and Navy, it's going to be a lot different than many of the other CFP elimination games that we talk about for much of the season. While this game is also considered a CFP elimination game, Navy is going to be heavily favored in this matchup. And it's not just our internal power rating models thinking that way. Our power rating models have Navy favored at 25.5, but FanDuel, while a little bit more optimistic about UAB's chances, and certainly not that much better. UAB is coming in as a 21.5 point underdog in this ball game. So I'm going to mix things up a little bit because it is such a lofty, I guess, expectation that Navy should be winning this game. So how I format things is going to be a little bit different from that standpoint, because what I really want to talk about is there truly a path for UAB to pull this upset off? And if so, how can they go about beating Navy on the road? And I do actually think there is a pathway for UAB to be able to pull this off in spite of the shootout that they were in last week against Alabama State. But I think five things need to happen, and all of them need to happen simultaneously in order for UAB to actually be able to pull this off. So I think the most important thing, especially when you're talking about Navy and the fact that they run a traditional triple option, is that for UAB defensively, they need to win the first down. Getting Navy off schedule by forcing second and long and third and long situations, try to create more of those passing oriented down situations, because that offense is not built to actually pass the football. They want to run it down your throat. They want to control clock. So getting them into those second and long and third and long situations is going to be fruitful, and it really helps sets the tone of the rest of the drive, especially when you win on those first down plays. That's going to be extremely important for UAB. It's also going to be extremely important for the possessions that they are going to have. They need to be effective. The possessions are going to be limited in this ball game. At most, I would expect each team to have 8 possessions, which sounds like a lot, but in the context of a college football game, that is not a ton of possessions that you get to work with whatsoever. So when you do have the ball in your hands, you got to be effective with your possessions. Can't not only trying your best not to have empty possessions, but also going free and out, knowing you're only going to have the ball a handful of times. It's extremely paramount that UAB is able to do that. The red zone efficiency is going to matter too, and it's going to be a matter of when UAB's in the red zone, they're going to have to go and get touchdowns. But while Navy is in the red zone, that's when you have to have that bend but don't break mentality. Force Navy to settle for field goals. It's also going to be important for them to win the turnover battle as well. Able to play a clean football game, which, to UAB's credit, offensively, they actually were pretty clean from that standpoint. But they're going to need to figure out how to generate turnovers and ultimately win the turnover battle. In addition to that, speaking of the offense for UAB, you're going to need to be able to get some explosive plays, and particularly through the air. The naval run defense is going to be pretty tough to run on. It's not going to be like trying to run this football on Alabama State. But what I will say is I think UAB might have a potential mismatch between the perimeter receivers for UAB against the corners and the DBs of Navy, right? I think there is an athletic advantage on the perimeter. And I think if that could show out, and this is a team that did average over 10 yards per attempt in their last game, I think there is a pathway where, you can rattle off some explosive plays through the air, so that way you don't have to, that you can essentially dictate the terms of how this game is going to go a little bit more, trying not to be methodical like Navy is planning on being methodical, getting those explosive plays through the air. If they can make that happen multiple times, I think at the very least you can make the Navy's defense a little bit more uncomfortable. But at the same time, while I think it's paramount for him to get those explosive plays through the air, they're also going to have to run the ball just well enough to keep Navy honest. We already talked about how the naval run defense is going to be pretty tough to run on, so you might need to rely on the passing game in order to generate offense consistently. That still means you still have to have some, you need to have some balance, or at least try to keep Navy honest, right? And they just need to run it just well enough in order to be able to, at least where Navy can't just key in on the pass, at least make them think about the run every once in a while. One advantage that UAB may also have as well is in special teams potentially, in particular in their kicker, Jonah Delane. Jonah Delane is one of the best kickers in the American, and when he gets opportunities to kick field goals or to get some good kickoffs, he really needs to step up. That's going to be extremely important. And generally the rest of the special teams as well, just trying to avoid miscues in the punt return game where you don't want to have any kind of like muff punts that lead to Navy having the football deep in UAB territory, as well as trying to avoid Navy getting these big returns as well. That's going to be extremely important as well. And if they can do all that and carry a lead into the fourth quarter, if they can do those four things, then number 5 is just carry a lead into the fourth quarter. If you can carry a lead into a fourth quarter, even if it's just a one possession lead, and it's a very small one possession lead, like a field goal, maybe at that point you could start making the Navy offense uncomfortable and maybe force them to pass the ball a little bit more often than what they're accustomed to doing, and just frankly hold on for dear life. And if they can do all of those things, I think there is a path for UAB to leave Annapolis with a huge win to start American Conference play, in spite of the fact that they are a major underdog. However, and I do actually think that some of these things can happen, but do I think that UAB ultimately pulls this off? Honestly, I would be pretty hard pressed to do that. I don't think that Navy is going to necessarily put up as many points as Alabama State did to UAB last week. It's not because I think Alabama State is a better offensive outfit than Navy is. I think that's primarily going to be based upon Navy's style of play, where they're going to want to be a little bit more methodical and dictate the tempo of the game, where they're going to dominate that time of possession, and a defense that already has some massive problems, especially in terms of giving up over 200 yards on the ground last week to an FCS team. And now you go up against a run-oriented team. I do think that it is not a very good matchup. And I don't think those rush defense issues, even if they get fixed at all, I don't think they get addressed enough over the course of 1 week where this actually ends up being a competitive game. Now, I do think UAB will have their moments. I think their offense is going to be good enough to where I think they could cover. I think that's in play. But I think it's the inability to get Navy off the field, especially when it matters the most. I think that's going to allow the midshipmen to really roll big in this one. And I'm talking about winning by a final score of 38-17. I do expect this to be a blowout. I'm really not high on Trent Dilfer, to be honest with you. And I'm standing on that based upon what we talked about in the offseason, especially with those American Conference like deep dive predictions, which if you want to check that out, that's down in the description. But I do expect Navy to roll, get to 2-0, and maybe set the tone for at least a really strong first half of the season for the midshipmen.